Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be reacting to a video called Why Does Europe Have So Many Microstates? I have never asked this question before, so I'm interested to find out the answer. Let's check it out and comment, like and subscribe.
Europe is home to a lot of small countries. Not just small relative to huge countries like the United States or Brazil or India or other countries people comment from, but like really tiny countries. The smallest fully sovereign country on Earth, in both area and population, is Vatican City, but it is hardly alone on this continent. So just how do so many of these tiny little microstates exist, and why are so many of them in Europe? So first, what is our general criteria for a microstate? Well, first off, perhaps we should differentiate microstates from micronations, which are tiny, unrecognized countries that someone or a small group of people might set up around their houses or farms or communes or unclaimed territories or disused helipads in the middle of the English Channel, either for fun or to protest something. But since no one recognizes them as actual countries, they obviously don't count here. And I'm also not going to count disputed countries because, frankly, I'd like to be able to post this video with my head still on my shoulders. No, we're here to talk about real, fully recognized countries that just so happen to have an area of less than, let's say, 3,000 square kilometers.
How much is that?
Because I said so. Now, dozens of countries actually fit this profile, very few of which are actually in Europe, but most of these countries are islands, which I'm not going to count in this video because their size isn't exactly surprising.
Yeah,
I mean,
an island.
Small islands, small country. In order to best explain why all these European microstates even exist as separate entities though, perhaps it would be best to look at each of them one by one to see not only how they got so small, but also how they survived on such a dynamic continent. High in the Pyrenees Mountains, nestled right between France and Spain, lies the Principality of Andorra. This little non-Schengen principality has a population of 76,000 and has no airports, no sea access, and the nearest railway station is in a French town literally called the Hospital near to Andorra. In a sense, really the entire reason for Andorra's existence in its rather unusual form has to do with the fact that most of Spain was once Islamic. In the centuries after the Battle of Tours in 732, in which French generals had successfully prevented Muslim forces from expanding into modern-day France, the Marca Hispanica, or Spanish Marches, were established as a kind of buffer zone between Muslim Spain and the rest of Christian Europe, with the newly created territory of Andorra under the protection of the Count of Urgell in modern-day Spain. These powers, however, eventually transferred to the Bishop of Urgell, with several grants then being passed onto the Count of Foix in modern-day France, effectively establishing him as the secular ruler of Andorra. To alleviate the power struggle between the bishop and the count, the Pariage of Andorra was enacted in 1278, establishing each of them as the two co-princes of Andorra. The Bishop of Urgell still holds his title, but when the County of Foix was incorporated into France, the title of Andorran co-prince was transferred to the King of France, and then after France's very interesting 19th century was transferred to the presidents of France. Now leading to the Andorran government's rather interesting classification as a unitary parliamentary semi-elective diarchy, as they also have a prime minister, who's actually from Andorra. Also high up in the mountains, but this time in the Alps, Liechtenstein...
It's gotta be pretty easy to run for prime ministers, like there's like 100,000 people over there.
Liechtenstein is as often forgotten, as it is hard to find, as it is hard to pronounce if you don't know German. The Principality of Liechtenstein was first created in 1719, when Charles VI of the Holy Roman Empire, or the ungodly Germanic kingdoms if you prefer, declared that the communities of Vaduz and Schellenberg were now unified into one territory, named after Anton Florian of the House of Liechtenstein. Back then, the idea of there being a principality of this small size in Central Europe was really nothing special, seeing as there were about 1,800 others just like it. But what really sets Liechtenstein apart is how it avoided being absorbed into its neighbors over the next 300 years.
How?
All was perfectly balanced until the end of the 18th century when the Napoleon nation attacked, with Napoleon dismantling the HRE and establishing the Confederation of the Rhine within its place, itself quickly replaced by the German Confederation. Liechtenstein became independent again in 1815, narrowly avoiding becoming part of Bavaria, and continuing to solidify its ties to its neighbors Austria and Switzerland. During the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, which was, interestingly enough, a war fought between Austria and Prussia in the year 1866. Liechtenstein manned an army of 80 soldiers to defend Austrian Tyrol from Italy, having sided with Austria in the war, but with Prince Johann II forbidding his soldiers from fighting other Germans. This, by the way, is where we get the popular legend of their army sending out 80 men and coming back with 81 because of their new Italian friend. From this point on, though, Liechtenstein would declare neutrality, though its economic ties to Austria-Hungary in World War I still led to it being sanctioned by the Allies. This led to them forming a customs and monetary union with their other neighbor, Switzerland, which would help it successfully remain neutral yet again in World War II, because Switzerland.
That makes sense.
In terms of area, the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg is actually quite a lot bigger than the other countries in this video, but obviously a list of mainland European microstates isn't exactly quite finished without it. And it is still quite a lot smaller than its neighbors France, Germany, or even Belgium. Luxembourg dates back
It's because the others are huge.
to the year 963, originally established as a small town around a fort, which would become one of the many other small kingdoms and city-states within the Holy Roman Empire. That was all well and good, but then once again Napoleon happened and broke up the HRE, with Luxembourg being re-established as a Grand Duchy under the German Confederation, originally being a bit bigger but losing land to Belgium. I actually made a whole video about Luxembourg from Luxembourg about 2 years ago if you want to learn more about it, which is good because now I can give more attention to the other countries here. It definitely does scream, hey look at us, we're not the Netherlands. The Principality of Monaco, one of the world's 3 true city-states, and the most densely populated sovereign state in the world, at a staggering population of 35,000, Monaco has been ruled by the House of Grimaldi more or less since 1297.
That's
and
crazy.
No surprise, is also the country with the highest GDP per capita in the world, at
Everyone's
least
rich.
according to the IMF and the UN. Monaco's name actually dates back to the 6th century BC, as according to an ancient myth, the god Hercules had passed through the area, turning away from the other gods, and thus a temple was erected near the modern nation. Because this temple was the only one here, it inspired the name Monoikos, from monos meaning one and oikos meaning house. The Grimaldi family set up shop in 1297, with the area of Monaco under the sovereignty of the Republic of Genoa. This lasted all well and good until 1797, when who else but Napoleon came in to mess stuff up as usual, conquering Genoa and all its holdings. Monaco was released from French occupation in 1814, but then became a protectorate of Sardinia under the Congress of Vienna the very next year, remaining in this position until the Treaty of Turin in 1860, with Sardinia backing out of Monaco, the nearby regions of Nice and Savoy ceding to France, and Monaco becoming a French protectorate yet again. Monaco was occupied by Italy and then the German Wehrmacht during the Second World War, with said forces being defeated and pushed back in 1944, though sadly not before Germany could get their hands on their Jewish population. More recently, Monaco became a full UN member in 1993, and a new treaty was signed with France in 2002, stating that, should there be no Grimaldi heirs to the Monegasque throne, Monaco would still remain an independent country. One of the oldest sovereign states in the world,
I like they put provisions on this.
And indeed the oldest republic, the most serene Republic of San Marino, was established all the way back in 301 AD by Saint Marinus, who established a monastic community far up in the Apennine Mountains in northeastern Italy in order to escape persecution under the Roman Empire. Like, literally right before they themselves became Christian, but oh well. Throughout its history, San Marino was mostly left alone, save being briefly occupied a few times, even managing to evade invasion by Napoleon thanks to San Marino's diplomat Antonio Onofri, literally just becoming good friends with Napoleon.
How?
Italy, like Germany, was divided into dozens of different little kingdoms and city-states for much of the second millennium AD, only to unify around the mid-19th century, except with a couple small pieces scattered around. During Italian unification, San Marino became a refuge of sorts for those who had previously been persecuted for supporting unification, with a treaty between San Marino and the new Kingdom of Italy being signed in 1862, effectively guaranteeing their independence. At this point, San Marino just started staying neutral in European affairs, including the unification of Italy and both world wars. Though at one point during the Second World War, the New York Times incorrectly reported that San Marino had declared war on the UK, to which they reportedly quickly told British authorities, no the hell we didn't. Finally, within the city of Rome lies what in my personal opinion might just be the weirdest country on earth. The Vatican City-State, as it's officially known. Home to the Pope and a higher average male-to-female ratio than most fantasy football websites, the Vatican essentially serves as the global headquarters of the Catholic Church. and is the only sovereign country not to be a member of the United Nations.
Yeah.
Throughout the Middle Ages, from 754 AD up until its conquest by the newly formed Kingdom of Italy in 1870, much of central Italy was dominated by the Papal States, basically a kingdom whose king just happened to be the Pope.
That's crazy.
Of course, this all ended in, well, technically 1861, but for sure in 1870. This, however, began a 60-year period of the Pope, actually 5 popes, acting essentially as prisoner of the Kingdom of Italy that they didn't recognize.
What?
With
That
Benito
happened?
Mussolini giving the Pope
yeah.
a small plot of land around the Vatican, provided he recognized the Kingdom of Italy and didn't get involved in international politics. So now that we've answered why all these microstates exist in Europe, now we must ask why all these microstates exist specifically in Europe. I mean, even if we don't count island nations like Singapore or Bahrain or Tuvalu, why aren't there really any mainland countries this small in Africa or Asia or the Americas? Well, mostly colonialism, but also most of these microstates are holdovers of old feudal states from Europe's Middle Ages. Essentially, as Europe was broken up and put back together so many times over the last 2,000 years,
Yeah.
these little nations are kind of the crumbs left behind as remnants of when Europe had many more of these tiny little nations. And now they're basically all independent tax havens. Thanks as always for watching. If you want to help
Oh my
support
God,
the
it's
channel,
true.
we have a Patreon page and a merch store that you can check out. If we're not quite at that point in our creator-subscriber relationship yet though, no worries, you can always just like, share, and subscribe for a new video 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, it's like I like this video because it really does like explains it all, but at the same time I'm like, does it like it's very in depth in the way of like, yes, you kind of like giving me like the Spark Notes version, but like how, you know, I get how, like it's still kind of like impressive that they managed to actually stay independent for that long, because I get the sort of like the big explanation of like, yes, you know, how come there's like so many in Europe. It's like, well, yes, colonialism, and at the end, you know, there's sort of like little remnants of like a time well past, and it's like, yes, you know, we don't do things like we don't do things like that these days, but they sort of like have remained. And it's yes, I get it. Like it's good, I think, but at the same time, it's like, okay, yeah, I get the explanation as in like the logical explanation, but still, to me, it's quite like awe-inducing and impressive that they managed to like stay independent for how long. How have you actually managed not to stay, like not to be absorbed by something else and by your surrounding states for that long? I think that's the craziest part about this, you know, to me at least, because it's like, yes, I get the logic, I get you're explaining it to me and you're explaining the history behind this all, but I still think it's crazy because I would love to compare this sort of like the microstates that actually do exist right now, compare them with these sort of other microstates and micronations that have not didn't manage to survive, and they were like ended up being absorbed by something else. I would actually love to know like the history behind them all, to see like what happened, because that was what made it so that they were able to like defend themselves so well. Because it's like, I don't know, it's kind of crazy. One thing is intention, and you're like, yo, we intend to be independent for, you know, 1,000 years, but it's like, yeah, but in real life, like stuff happens, and wars happen. Conflicts happen, guys, you know, kings happen, or not kings, conquerors, or, well, you know, not conquerors, but like, I don't know, you know, whatever, dictators, Napoleon happens, I don't know, like, there are so many things that can happen in, like, throughout this span of, like, so long and so many years, that, I don't know, it's crazy that you actually managed to do this and still sort of, like, hold on to this, because I think, I never actually thought about this, it's like, oh, yes, you know, it's sort of like, it's like this, and that's sort of like it. But I hadn't actually thought of the logistics of you sort of like remaining independent for how long again? It's like 1,000 years. Okay, over 1,000 years. That's really, really insane. I think like maybe, and because I also would love to know like how the identity of those countries actually is, because I know it's San Marino, like I know it's in Italy, but they're like not. I know, like they're just kind of like it's weird, right? I don't know, like you're sort of like inside a country, or you're sort of like in the border between like two countries, but you're something different, like Andorra or Liechtenstein. Like there's again, what's the identity of, or even Monaco? Like, do people themselves consider themselves. I don't know, like it's Monaco, like are they consider themselves French, or do they just like no, we're not. If I ever like find myself speaking to a person from Monaco, and if I call them French, would they be offended? Would they be like no, that's something else? I know, I would love to know, because obviously they speak French, like in their case, like they speak French, so it's like do they have their own sense of like, maybe for them it's actually a little bit stronger, just because they have a royal family, and the fact that they have a royal family makes it so that maybe your sort of like your sense of identity is more tied to that. So I don't know, that's something I'm thinking about, and maybe they do not consider themselves French. I don't know. Do they? This kind of crazy. Or even Andorra, which is, I know it's a tiny country. I don't really know much about it. I don't even know what language they speak over there. Do they speak French? I would assume maybe they speak French, but again, do they consider themselves French? What's their culture and what's their culture like? Is it very similar to the French culture, or is it a third thing? Or is it a mix between Spanish and French culture? I don't know. Would love to know, to speak like someone from there, just because it's so like different. I think like even Luxembourg as well. I think one thing that I'm realizing is a lot of these like micronations are French actually, but not really. I wouldn't want to offend, but they're close to or similar. Located like in a place that's been historically close to France, or even just France, or obviously the ones in Italy. Those are like the others, but. I don't know, the San Marino one. Do you consider yourself Italian? What's your culture like? Is it Italian? Is it something else? Is it like San Marino culture specifically? I don't know. Would love to know. I'm so curious. I've never actually spoken with people from these countries. So I would love to know. The ones from the Pope, like the Vatican, that to me is the one that's really weird. I don't think that should be a country. I know why it is. Yes, the Catholic Church, it's very important, whatever, but I don't think you should call this, a country, just because, yes, it's the Pope. And the Pope, actually, that was kind of like, I didn't know this. The Pope back in, 100 years? No, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. Like, the Pope, like, Mussolini, like, just gave a bunch of land to the Pope. And several popes, they were like, yes, you can control this. It's like, wait, what? Like, isn't the Pope, like, should the Pope be controlling this? Isn't the Pope sort of like, because it's a religion thing? And I know, it's kind of weird to look at the context in the modern world of like an actual like a church, or more specifically like a religious figure, to be in charge of like a state. That's crazy. Like, we don't do things anymore. Like that's not, we shouldn't be allowed, that shouldn't be allowed in right now. That we left those things back in like I don't know, 1,000 years ago. So it's kind of crazy to hear this, because like I don't think the Pope should be like, the Pope, like he sits the head of a church, like he should not be like messing around with other businesses. However, I know that, yes, it's kind of crazy to think of like, why should the church be like have a country? That's crazy. And how come other churches do not do this? It's like, I don't know, other churches of other religions in the rest of the world. I don't know, it's kind of an insane thing. But again, I recognize, and that's why I'm like, I shouldn't be a country, because in the other countries, in the other micronations, people live there. Like, again, like the Monaco has like a royal family, but people still live there. Like you have people, normal people that actually live there. But in the case of like the Pope and the Vatican, it's like the Vatican, no one lives there. It's just like no one lives there. The Pope and everyone that works at the Vatican. Can you work at the Vatican? I do not know like the distinction. Or there's like nuns probably and priests, but I don't know, the cardinals. I don't know who lives there, but I know everyone has to be like related to the Catholic Church, and probably people of like most important to the church. But it's not like I can just decide I move there. I'm like, oh, I'm moving to the Vatican. It's like, no, I can't do that. Like normal people cannot just move over there. So that's why I think it's like it shouldn't be a country. Although I know it's kind of silly of me. Like there's plenty of other countries where you can where you just can't like, oh, I'll move there because it's not allowed. But like they all have like different distinctions. So as a general rule, that's why I think it's so weird to mention like the Vatican as an actual state. It's like that shouldn't be a state. And I know, yes, they're not technically a state. They're a micronation. Yes, they're not represented in the United Nations. It's a whole thing. But that to me, I'm with the one that made the video that was like, it's like the weirdest country on earth. It's like, yes, I agree. It shouldn't even be a country, but I wouldn't know what to call it. I don't know. We should dismantle the whole system. I don't know. It's kind of crazy. But that was it for today, and I'll see you next time. Bye.